You knew something was off from the beginning. Not in a way you could articulate, not in a way that would have made sense if you'd tried to explain it to someone else. Just a feeling. A low, persistent awareness that something about this person was slightly out of reach, that there was a door somewhere that never quite opened, that no matter how close you got, there was always another inch of distance you couldn't close. And instead of that distance pushing you away, it pulled you in. That's the part nobody talks about honestly. Not the pain of it, which everyone acknowledges, but the pull, the specific, almost gravitational attraction towards someone who won't fully let you in. The way the unavailability itself became part of what made them magnetic. The way you found yourself thinking about them more, not less, because of the uncertainty. Working harder, not less, because the connection felt just out of reach. And somewhere underneath all of it, underneath the hope and the effort and the moments that felt like breakthroughs, only to be followed by more distance, a quieter question you probably never asked out loud. Why him? Why this? Why does this keep happening? Not just this relationship, if you're honest, this pattern, this specific kind of person who shows up with that particular combination of intensity and withdrawal, warmth and coldness, moments of profound connection followed by disappearances that leave you wondering what you did wrong. Why does it work? Why does it keep working? On smart women, on self-aware women, on women who know better and choose it anyway. That's what we're going to answer today. Not with judgment, not with the tired advice to just choose better or love yourself more. With the actual psychology, the real mechanism, the specific things emotionally unavailable men do, consciously or not, that create one of the most powerful and destructive pulls in human relationship dynamics. Because once you understand the mechanism, it loses its power over you. And you deserve to be free of it. Let's start where it actually starts. Not with the relationship, with what he does in the first moments that sets everything in motion. What emotionally unavailable men do, and why it's so effective. First, understand something about emotionally unavailable men that almost nobody says clearly. Most of them are not calculating. Most of them are not running a strategy. Most of them are not sitting somewhere designing a psychological trap for the women they meet. They're just broken in a very specific way. And that specific brokenness, the way it expresses itself, the behavioral signature it produces, happens to be extraordinarily effective at creating attachment in women who have their own specific history. That's not an accident of the universe. It's the collision of two psychological patterns that fit together like a lock and a key. And understanding both sides of that collision is how you stop being surprised when it happens again. The first thing he does, he shows you something real and then pulls it back. This is the opening move, and it's the most important one, because everything that follows is built on what this moment creates. Early on, sometimes in the very first conversation, there's a moment of unexpected depth, of genuine vulnerability, of something real surfacing in him that feels rare and unperformed. He says something honest about his pain, his past, his fear. Or he sees something in you with a precision that feels startling. Or there's a moment of connection so specific and immediate that it doesn't feel like something that happens with everyone. And you respond to it. Of course you do, because it's real, because depth is rare, because the combination of strength and that brief, unexpected opening of vulnerability is one of the most compelling things a human being can encounter in another. And then he pulls back. Not dramatically. Not coldly, just the door closes again. The depth retreats. He becomes more guarded, more distant, more surface level. And you're left holding the memory of that moment, that brief opening, wondering how to get back there. Here's the psychology of what just happened. That sequence, depth followed by withdrawal, does something very specific to the brain's reward system. It creates what behavioral psychologists call a variable reward pattern, the most addictive reward schedule known to human psychology, the same mechanism that makes gambling so difficult to walk away from. When rewards are consistent and predictable, the brain habituates. It adjusts. It stops responding with the same intensity. But when rewards are intermittent, when they appear and disappear without a clear pattern, the brain doesn't habituate. It escalates. It becomes more focused, more preoccupied, more motivated to pursue the reward because the unpredictability itself keeps the neurological response at peak intensity. He showed you something real. He pulled it back, and your brain, not your weakness, not your poor judgment, your brain began organizing itself around getting back to that moment. That's not falling for someone. That's being neurologically hooked before you understood what was happening. The second thing he does, he makes his attention feel like an achievement. With emotionally available men, attention is consistent, present, reliable. It shows up without you having to do anything particular to earn it. And while that consistency is the foundation of actual intimacy, it doesn't produce the same neurological intensity as attention that has to be earned. With emotionally unavailable men, his full attention, when you get it, feels different, significant, like something you worked for and won. Because it's not freely given, it's rationed, and rationed attention feels more valuable than abundant attention, even when that perception is entirely manufactured by scarcity rather than by the actual quality of what's being offered. This is where it gets darker, because some part of you begins to interpret the effort required to get his attention as evidence of the relationship's depth. The harder you work for connection, the more important the connection feels, the more significant he becomes. Not because he is more significant, but because your investment in him has grown to the point where it creates its own justification. You've put so much in, it has to be worth it. He has to be worth it. Because if he isn't, what does that say about the time, the energy, the emotional cost of pursuing someone who keeps almost letting you in? That thought, the sunk cost of it, becomes one of the chains that keeps you in it long past the point where the evidence is clear. But here's where it gets worse, because that's only half of the mechanism. Say this with me: my effort is not evidence of his worth. Here's what everyone tells women who are caught in this pattern. He's not that deep. The mystery isn't real depth, it's just damage. You're romanticizing unavailability. Choose someone who's actually there. Choose the good man who texts back, who shows up consistently, who makes you feel secure. And here's the brutal, uncomfortable truth about that advice. They're right about everything, and it changes almost nothing. Because the problem was never a lack of information. Women in this pattern almost always know intellectually that the emotionally unavailable man is not the better choice. They know the available man is objectively healthier. They know the consistent attention is what they say they want. And they still feel more alive with the one who's pulling away. That gap between what you know and what you feel is where the real psychology lives. And nobody closes that gap by knowing more. You close it by understanding what's driving the feeling in the first place. The third thing he does, he activates a wound that was there before he arrived. This is the part that requires the most honesty, and it's the part that, when you really sit with it, changes everything. The emotionally unavailable man doesn't create the pattern. He fits into one that already existed. One that was built, usually, long before you ever met him. In a childhood home, in a relationship with a parent who was sometimes present and sometimes not, who was warm in moments and withdrawn in others, who made love feel like something you had to earn rather than something you simply had. That early experience of inconsistent love, of connection that appeared and disappeared, of having to work to be seen by someone you needed, that experience didn't just hurt you, it taught you something. It taught you that this is what love feels like, that the pursuit is part of it, that love without the uncertainty, without the effort, without the slight ache of not quite being enough, that kind of love feels incomplete, feels too easy, feels somehow less real. And when the emotionally unavailable man shows up, with his depth and his withdrawal, his warmth and his distance, his moments of connection followed by disappearance, something in you recognizes it. Not consciously, deeper than conscious. In the part of you that learned what love was before you had words for any of it. He feels familiar, and familiar feels like home, even when home was painful. Stop, because I need you to sit with what I just said. Not to assign blame to your parents or your past or the people who shaped you before you could shape yourself, but to understand something that is genuinely liberating once you see it clearly. The reason available love feels flat, the reason the consistent, present, emotionally open man doesn't produce the same intensity is not because he's less, it's because he doesn't fit the wound. He doesn't activate the familiar ache. He doesn't feel like the pattern you learned to call love. That flatness you feel with him is not evidence that he's wrong for you. It's evidence of how deep the old pattern runs. And the work, the real work, the work that actually breaks the cycle, is not finding a better man. It's learning to tolerate and eventually to want love that doesn't hurt. The fourth thing he does, he gives you just enough to make leaving feel impossible. This is the most deliberately or instinctively cruel element of the whole dynamic, and it's the one that keeps women in these relationships long after everything rational has said to leave. He doesn't disappear completely. That would make it simple. If he were entirely cold, entirely absent, entirely incapable of connection, the choice would eventually become clear. But he's not. He's intermittently available. And those intervals of availability, those moments where the warmth returns, where he's present and open, and you glimpse the person you fell for, those moments reset everything. They reset the hope, the investment, the willingness to stay and try again. Because the good moments are real. That's what makes them so effective. He's not performing warmth he doesn't feel. When he's present, he's genuinely present. When he's open, there's real depth there. The problem isn't that the good moments are fake. The problem is that they're not sustainable. They're not the baseline. They're the exception that keeps getting mistaken for the potential. And potential, the belief that if you stay, if you're patient enough, if you love him well enough, the good version will eventually become the consistent version. Potential is the most expensive thing a woman can invest in someone who isn't capable of delivering it. Because he can't deliver it. Not because he doesn't want to, necessarily, but because emotional unavailability is not a choice he's making about you. It's a limitation he's carrying that has nothing to do with you. You cannot love him into capacity he doesn't have. You cannot be patient enough, or understanding enough, or present enough to heal something in him that he hasn't decided to heal himself. That is not a reflection of your worth. It is a fact about his limitations. Repeat after me. I cannot love someone into being ready for me. Now here's what actually breaks the cycle. Not what sounds good, what actually works. Understanding what you've been mistaking for love. The intensity you feel with emotionally unavailable men, the preoccupation, the longing, the way he takes up space in your mind even when he's absent, the heightened aliveness of the uncertainty. That feeling is real. It's powerful. It's genuine. It is not love. It is anxiety wearing love's clothing. It is the nervous system in a state of hyperactivation, scanning constantly for signs of connection or rejection, producing the neurochemical cocktail of stress and intermittent reward that your brain has learned to interpret as passion. Real love, the kind built on consistency and safety and genuine mutual presence, doesn't feel like that. It feels quieter, more stable, less like being on a roller coaster and more like standing on solid ground. And when solid ground has always felt like stagnation to you, if stability has always read as boring, as absence of feeling, as somehow less than the intensity you're used to, that is the most important thing you will ever recognize about yourself. Because it means you've been chasing the feeling of anxiety and calling it love.
and you'll keep chasing it until you understand that the ground beneath your feet can be solid and still be where you want to stand.
What breaking the cycle actually requires. It doesn't require finding the right man, not yet. It requires something that happens before that. It requires grieving the version of love you learned as a child that was never actually love. The love that came with conditions, the love that required performance, the love that appeared and disappeared and left you in the space between trying to figure out what you did wrong. That grief is real, and it is significant, and most people skip it entirely. They move from one emotionally unavailable person to the next, or they choose someone available and feel nothing, or they spend years wondering why they can't just want what's good for them. The answer is always the same. You can't want something different until you've fully felt the cost of what you've been wanting, until you've sat with the grief of the love that should have been consistent and wasn't, until you've stopped protecting the people who first taught you that love was something you had to earn. That grief, when you let it happen, is the thing that begins to loosen the pattern's grip. Not eliminate it overnight, loosen it. Give you a moment of pause where there wasn't one before. Create enough space between the pull and the response that you can make a choice rather than just following the familiar gravity. What available love actually feels like, and why you have to learn to want it. Here's the honest truth about what happens when women who have always been drawn to emotional unavailability encounter genuine emotional availability for the first time. It feels wrong, too easy, like something must be missing, like the absence of anxiety means the absence of feeling, like the consistency is somehow suspicious. Nobody is actually like this. What is he hiding? Why isn't this harder? That discomfort, that allergic reaction to healthy love is not evidence that healthy love is wrong for you. It's evidence that your nervous system hasn't learned yet to recognize safety as desirable rather than as a red flag. The work is teaching it, slowly, by staying in the discomfort of being loved consistently rather than running from it, by noticing when the flatness appears and understanding what it actually is, not absence of connection, but absence of anxiety, and choosing to stay anyway. By letting the solid ground become familiar before you decide it's not enough. That process takes time. It is not linear. There will be moments where the pull toward unavailability is so strong that the available person in front of you feels invisible by comparison. Those moments are not failure. They are the pattern showing you where you still have work to do. And every time you stay, every time you choose presence over intensity, consistency over excitement, safety over the familiar ache, the pattern loses a little more of its grip. The final thing to understand. Emotionally unavailable men are not villains. Most of them are people carrying wounds of their own, wounds that made them close off, build walls, ration their availability as a form of self-protection. Their damage is real, their pain is real, and none of that makes them the right person to be in a relationship with while they're still inside it. You can have compassion for someone and still recognize that their limitations are not yours to absorb. You can understand why someone is the way they are and still choose not to organize your life around hoping they'll change. You can love someone and still decide that what they're capable of offering is not enough for what you need. That is not cruelty. That is clarity. And clarity directed inward at your own patterns, your own wounds, your own definition of what love is supposed to feel like is the beginning of wanting something different. You came into this understanding the feeling, but not the mechanism. Knowing the pull was powerful, but not knowing why it was so specifically powerful on you. Now you know. The variable reward pattern, the rationed attention that feels like achievement, the wound that was there before he arrived, the intermittent availability that resets the hope every time leaving becomes possible. 4 things emotionally unavailable men do. Not because they're monsters, because they're damaged in ways that happen to activate damage in you, and the collision of those 2 patterns produces something that feels like destiny and functions like a trap. You're not weak for having fallen into it. You're human, with a history, with a nervous system that learned what it learned before you could teach it anything different. But you know now, and knowing changes what's possible. If this reached something in you,
If somewhere in these words you recognize the pattern you've been living and felt maybe for the first time that it has an explanation that isn't about your worth, then share this, because someone you know is in it right now, convinced he's the one, convinced that if she just stays patient enough, present enough, loving enough, the door will finally open all the way. It won't open from the outside. It never does. The only door that was ever yours to open was your own.